Hey everyone, it is your friend Joseph Craven here on the Weekly Pessimist podcast covering Mississippi State athletics. Well, I say covering, it's really more just, general discussion from a noted moron. So if you're listening to this, you really could find better things to do with your time. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm joined as always by my co-host, 7-month-old puppy Radar O'Reilly. 40 pounds at this point at 7 months old. We assumed she would get to be about 40 pounds total based on what little bit we knew about her as a rescue dog. And now that she's sitting here at 40 pounds at only 7 months, we are terrified of the monster that she may become. But the Bulldogs right now are looking a little bit more like the monstrous basketball team, y'all like that segue, that they were developing into during the non-conference slate. Back-to-back conference wins in 1 week. Super exciting time there because there was, we'll talk more about this, but especially against Vanderbilt, you could see the confidence start to return after a very disappointing start to the conference season and I guess that long break in between non-conference and conference play that really threw everything off. So what worked against Florida and Vanderbilt? Those are kind of the main things to look at first and foremost with this basketball team. And I think first and foremost, what worked against Florida and Vanderbilt, or what we started to see a little bit against Ole Miss, and we talked a little bit about when it was me, Roe, and Craig on the road, stopping by the gas station in Louisville, enjoying some road snacks. But it's the play of the freshmen, Reggie Perry and Robert Woodard, the second. I think you got to emphasize that. I don't know. Does he go by junior or second? I forget now. But the freshmen really standing out in their performances. And this is key because as good as this team is, Howland does not go super deep with this squad. I mean, we're consistently running as an 8-man basketball team. And I mean, you look at Florida, on the other hand, Florida went 10 players deep. Florida was playing, now granted, it really was more of 9 players deep, but they did have a 10th player who came in for at least 3 minutes of the game looking at the box score. Again, they're very similar to Mississippi State in that their 3 main guards, Allen, Nembhard, and Locke, played 30-plus minutes, like the Bulldogs like to do between the Weatherspoons and Lamar Peters. Those 3 are always going to play, 30-something minutes a game. But it was interesting taking Eric Holman out of the starting lineup against Florida. Putting in Woodard was something that was, I guess, a tactical observation that Howland made beforehand. In particular, the tactical observation being putting in Woodard instead of putting in Perry, which would make a little bit more sense because Perry has more of a true post player physique, at that 6'10" or 6'9", and his muscular frame. But Woodard, obviously not a small dude at all, only a couple inches shorter. Just about the same weight. He's huge. And he's been playing with a lot of physicality. He and Perry play with much more physicality than anyone else on the Mississippi State team does. You can make an argument at this point that Abdul Adu is starting to learn how to use his physicality, and I do think he has, and I think that's very important. But Woodard and Perry, as true freshmen, are just showing a lot more of that. And that's what was really needed, because against South Carolina and against Ole Miss, there was none of that. The weaknesses of the Ole Miss Rebels in particular, of course, were their lack of physicality, and especially down low. So the fact that Abdul Adu, who I think had a great second half against Ole Miss, really cleaned up his mistakes from the first half for the most part. And we do tend to forget that he's only a sophomore on the court, so, he's still got time to continue to get better. But Eric Holman, he's a slender guy anyway. He's not going to be a super physical player. But he didn't even use his athleticism or length efficiently against Ole Miss. And so there needed to be a change. There needed to be a change, and it's not really a knock against Eric Holman. The 2 seniors in Holman and Q Weatherspoon, were struggling against South Carolina and Ole Miss. Neither of them looked good. Neither of them looked like themselves. That's the most important thing. It's not so much that they looked bad, that they, whatever, but they didn't look like themselves. And I think that is very crucial because that little slump was, greatly harming the squad. The fact that Q and Eric were not the leaders that they needed to be for that squad, for this team, was evident in the way the rest of the team kind of responded. The fact that they were off, they're supposed to be, the consistent guys there. We know Lamar Peters is incredibly talented, but we know there's also probably going to be a point in time which Lamar Peters puts up 10 3-pointers and doesn't hit a single one of them, right? Like, we know that. We know that Lamar Peters is maybe going to get a technical foul against Vanderbilt and have to sit out for the majority of the second half. Q Weatherspoon and Eric Holman are the consistent veteran players on this squad, and we need that in order to be successful. And they were not consistent, they were not reliable, and they were not playing like themselves against South Carolina or Ole Miss, or really even Florida. So something needed to happen there, and I think it was really the stepping up of Reggie Perry, Robert Woodard, and let's not forget what Tyson Carter did with his 12 points against Florida. 4 of 6 from deep in that game. Tyson Carter, love him as a sixth man. He's exactly what you want in a sixth man player on this squad. I've been saying squad a lot. I'm going to try to refrain from doing that for the rest of the podcast, okay? That's a deal? Let's just say that's a deal. But Tyson Carter, incredible sixth man, brings in a variety of scoring. Yeah, I mean, everyone talks about how great he is as a deep range shooter, and that's true, but let's not forget that if he wants to, he can drive in and hit these floaters. I mean, he shows a lot of versatility in his scoring. He is a true bench scorer, sixth man type of player, and I love that because of what he brings into this lineup. I don't know if Tyson is going to be a starter in his senior year. I don't know if he would work as a starter in this lineup. I think he works best as that, consummate sixth man, and I hope he's okay with that. I know he kind of reminds me of what Phil Turner used to bring back in the day. Just obviously, Phil Turner could, headbutt the rim when he jumped. That dude was a physical specimen when it came to his athleticism. And Carter, obviously, much more of a refined scorer. Phil Turner was just kind of a high-energy player who would get a bunch of rebounds as like a point guard and hit threes every now and then. So different style of players, but what they bring in terms of importance to the team and that sixth man mentality, very important and very similar. So against Florida, we had the youth, but more than anything else, more than the youth even standing out, and maybe more than the fact that we actually were willing to bring Holman off the bench in order to get his head right, but also exploit matchups. More than anything else, just being able to prove that we were not in the same boat as Florida, a struggling conference team right now, and just break the duck. Get that off our backs. Get the whole "we haven't won a conference game yet" thing off our backs. Get out of the slump. That was really evident in the way the momentum carried the Bulldogs against Vanderbilt. Now, granted, Vanderbilt very, very much showing that they are not a good team this year, which is, I don't know, kind of a shame in a lot of ways because they did some good things before conference play started. I mean, they beat Arizona State pretty handedly, which is something that the Bulldogs obviously did not do. They pushed Ole Miss to open conference play at least a little bit. It was a 10-point loss by the end of that. But then you got, almost 20-point loss to Georgia. You've got them pushing Kentucky, 9-point loss there at Rupp Arena. You've got a 3-point loss against South Carolina, and then you've got this thumping by the Bulldogs that just happened. They're just a tricky team, because you look at it in a lot of ways, they probably should be better than they are, but then you also look at it and it makes a lot of sense as to why they're not very good right now. So Mississippi State needed a conference confidence, booster against Florida. You would say that Vanderbilt out of the two of those would be the confidence booster because they obviously were a less impressive matchup. But Florida, I think, had to be the confidence booster. I can't speak. To lead into the Vanderbilt victory because, thank you, Radar, because we had to prove that we were not slumping any longer. We had to get that, we had to get the confidence back so that we could go up against a bad opponent and not slip up. Because the way things were going, and you have just look back at the South Carolina game, for example. And South Carolina, I understand, is starting conference playoff very, very well, but looking like a much different team than they were in non-conference play. But that still was not a highly regarded team at that point in time, and the Bulldogs just looked terrible against them. To avoid doing that again against Vanderbilt, State had to get their confidence back. And beating a decent Florida squad, who is, some people are still saying, looking like a tournament-type team, perhaps. I don't really know if I agree with that, but some people are still saying that. To put up a performance, a victory against them to open up, finally get that conference win, it'll lead into victories over teams that Mississippi State should win. Should be able to defeat. It'll open those up a little bit. Because if you're lacking confidence like they clearly were doing against South Carolina and against Ole Miss, then it's just not going to pan out well. And another thing that really is a stark difference against Vanderbilt than what we had the first 3 conference games, going back to Holman and Weatherspoon looking like themselves. Obviously back to the traditional lineup of the 2 Weatherspoons, Lamar Peters, Abdullah Dew, and Eric Holman, even though Dew only played about 12 minutes of the game. But Holman back in the starting lineup and responded with a near double-double, 10 points, 9 rebounds. Also 3 assists. Let's not forget that Eric Holman is one of the best passers on the team, oddly enough. But Q Weatherspoon and Eric Holman went back to being themselves. Holman was using his athleticism and length to get some rebounds. He was stretching the defense. He was playing with more energy. He was playing with more tenacity. He was playing with more focus. Weatherspoon, on the other end, started showing more of that creative scoring once again. You saw a couple possessions, especially in the second half, where he would cut into the lane, get a defender slightly out of position, and just put up one of those little kind of like flat-footed quasi-floaters that Q Weatherspoon is so good at scoring. It's little things like that. Against Ole Miss, against South Carolina, Q was forcing a lot of things. Even against Florida, Q was forcing a lot of things. Against Vanderbilt, he looked like he was more in his wheelhouse. He looked much more natural. He looked a lot more like he was the veteran leading scorer, one of the best players in the conference, one of the best high school recruits when he was coming out of high school. He looked more like himself again by not just forcing contested three-pointers, especially from like 40 feet out like he did against Ole Miss. Oh my gosh. Anyway, you saw more of what we needed, what we expected out of Q Weatherspoon and Eric Holman. But you combine that with good performances out of the freshmen, Reggie Perry and Robert Woodard, who are continuing to impress. Woodard, a nice 9 points and a lot of high-energy physical play off the bench. Perry, 6 points, 8 rebounds. You just can't say enough about how important those two factors are and the complete difference in what we saw the first 3 games of the conference slate till now. Those two factors being the consistent and, what's the term I'm looking for? Lifelike? Like, what's the term for when players play like themselves? We'll just, say those veterans having their identity again and the freshmen really stepping up and rising to the occasion and growing as players like they should. They always say that you expect to see the most growth in a player in basketball between their freshman and sophomore season because they finally got the freshman year out of the way. They've kind of adjusted to the game, the speed of the college game a little bit more, and you really expect to see them really develop into more complete players in that stretch. Now, obviously, that does not happen if they do not show some signs of improvement in the second half of the season in conference play, and that's what we're seeing out of Perry and Woodard. Huge to see the bright futures for those two, without a doubt. But it's also important that this happened on a night in which the Bulldogs were not shooting well from deep. On the night, it was, 26% from three-point range? And so far in the season, Mississippi State has been a much better shooting team than they had, obviously, than last year, where I think, you could have put me and 4 other dudes on the court, and we would have been a better shooting team from deep than the Bulldogs were. looking a little bit more like that against Vanderbilt in terms of just not really shooting the ball well, but it didn't matter because other factors were really taking center stage. The Q driving to the basket, he didn't even attempt a three-pointer, all right? He didn't even attempt a three in the game, and he had 17 points. Q driving to the basket, Eric dominating down low, the physicality of Perry and Winter. I mean, that's huge. That's important because the best teams in any sport, the best teams are the ones that find ways to win when their normal game plan is not working out. The Bulldogs not shooting well from three-point range is against the flow of how the season has gone for them so far. But in order to prove that they are a good team and they are still right up there in like top of the conference type of discussion, because I think that you really have about, I feel like 5, good teams in the SEC. And I know that a lot of people are saying, oh, like 7 teams from the SEC can get in. And you know what? I understand that. I think that this is the year, and we'll talk about this on ROTC at some point, but I feel like this is the year which we can actually say, oh man, the SEC is actually good at basketball. Because Tennessee, good. Auburn, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, all ranked. LSU over here, undefeated in conference play so far, on a 7-game winning streak. 14-3 overall. Look at LSU go. They're, doing. Now, granted, they might have cheated a lot to get there. Whoops. But anyway, you've got right there LSU, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Auburn. Those are all right there 5 good teams, South Carolina's only lost 1 conference game so far, which is impressive. You never know when somebody like Alabama can turn it on because they've kind of been a sloppy team right now. Been a team that probably could have won a few more games if they had just done a few things a little bit better. Just look at the fact that they almost beat Tennessee, this last week. Only 3-point loss to Tennessee, 1-point loss to Texas A&M, 2-point victory over Kentucky. So we know that Alabama has some potential there, but they're not putting on. The SEC's pretty good this year. They just are. Mississippi State is starting to look once again like one of those teams that could be sitting up there in like the discussion with let's say if the top 3 teams in the SEC are Tennessee without a doubt, which is still crazy to me that a women's basketball powerhouse would finally get a good men's team for like the first time ever. Tennessee without a doubt. I think Auburn is slipping away from what they were able to do last year. I think that they are really slipping away, and I think that they fall apart before the end of the season. Kentucky, I can't get a read on Kentucky. They seem like a very okay team, but not a great team, but still like have the potential to be a great team. And LSU, who knows what's going on with them. But anyway, you look at all that, and it's like, okay, well, if you said that the top 3 teams in the conference right now might be Tennessee, LSU, Ole Miss. And what's separating Mississippi State from being right up there in that discussion? Well, honestly, a slip up against South Carolina and then a hard-fought game against Ole Miss, who might be one of the top 3 best teams in the conference right now. And I do say right now because we're early in conference slate. Who knows how things might shake up? LSU could completely fall apart. Kentucky could put together, not lose another conference game. That sort of thing can happen. You never really know. But the SEC is good right now. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens as the rest of the conference play goes on. I almost said conference plate, and I'm not really sure why I really wanted to say the word plate. Maybe I was trying to say the conference slate. Who knows? Radar is very feisty right now and wanting to play, so that's kind of getting in the way. That's happening a lot. Let's look a little bit at the Kentucky Wildcats because the Bulldogs have to go to Rupp Arena to play them on Tuesday night. Kentucky just coming off of a minor victory over Auburn in a pretty entertaining but weird game. Here's a few notable things if you weren't watching the game. Here's a few notable things about it. Number one, as it's been the case, especially with the SEC when in terms of basketball officiating, but officials dominated the flow of the game. This has been just the most frustrating topic of conversation, but college basketball, more than any other sport, has no rhythm to it because officiating tries to control the flow of the game. All right? I don't know why the mentality is we need officials to control the pace and flow and not like officials responding to the natural pace and flow of the game. Because if you watch an NBA game, the officials will follow the pattern of what is going on the court. And that's not the case in college basketball. In college basketball, the officials attempt to control what is going on the court. And it's just disgusting. Well, that happened a lot against Kentucky and Auburn. Neither team really could get into much of a rhythm for a good bit of the game. The only time that a team was able to get into rhythm was in the early second half. Kentucky just came out from halftime and exploded. Went up 45-29 at one point, and Auburn had to scrap back in order to make it close. It looked for a while in there like Kentucky was just going to run away with it because Auburn was looking like a soft team. Auburn was looking like what we know about them. They're extremely guard-centric, like to an absolute extreme where they don't really have much muscle at all. And Kentucky was finally starting to take advantage of that a little bit. But when you have a combination of a hot shooting Auburn team and also just a complete lack of flow due to officiating, you never know what's going to happen. Plus, Kentucky, as always, is another very young team. Young teams are inconsistent. Here's some interesting things about Kentucky. While people have been, obviously you rave about John Calipari's recruiting and how they always have so many NBA players that come through Kentucky. Well, let's not forget that he only has one title at Kentucky, and that was only because of an NBA lockout that meant a lot of his players returned. So he had the only veteran squad that he's ever really had. And here's an interesting fact. This is the first time that Kentucky had beaten a top 15 team on the road in years. 2014 was the last time that the Kentucky Wildcats beat a top 15 team in their own place. So that goes back to the fact that Kentucky, much like some of the other top teams in the conference, are kind of looking like good, not necessarily great teams. I mean, Tennessee's the standout of the conference by far, but even you look at our dearly beloved Bulldogs, I mean, we're not necessarily looking like world beaters all the time, but we do look like we could compete with any of the other teams in the conference. LSU, Ole Miss, Kentucky, Auburn, Mississippi State. I mean, you look at, that's right there. Those are the teams in the SEC right now. Officiating also really screwed things up at the end. About 2 minutes to go, Kentucky was up 5, and the officials decided to call a flagrant 1 foul on what was the least flagrant foul of all time. And then it was this hilarious moment because the Auburn player, I forget who it was that did it. He went up for a dunk. Kentucky player jumped up to try to go for the ball. The Auburn player couldn't complete the dunk. All right, so first and foremost, he didn't complete the dunk. He fell. He hit his head on the ground and cut his head open due to hitting the ground. The Kentucky player, in the meantime, hit his hand in a standard foul. All right, so not even like the Kentucky player did not hit him in the head, anything like that. But they go back and they call the flagrant foul, and the Auburn player is like flexing and flaunting like he accomplished something. He missed the dunk and hit his head on the ground and cut his head on the floor. Like, next time I stub my toe, I'm going to start flexing to see if, like, I don't know, if it boosts my confidence the same way. Anyway, it didn't make any sense. It was a dumb call. It put Auburn a little bit closer and in a better position to make a push towards the end because right after that, Auburn was able to actually take an 80-79 lead with 32 seconds left. Gosh, Radar is so playful right now. So Kentucky was able to pull it through at the very end, but they've been inconsistent in conference play, most of that being because, once again, they are led by freshmen. So if there's any hope of beating Kentucky this season, obviously it comes down to rattling them. because freshmen are, unreliable by nature. They're going to try to go deeper than Mississippi State does, most likely. That not hard to do. We really only go 8 players deep. We had a Keyshawn Fizell sighting against Vanderbilt because it was a pretty big margin of victory. But obviously, tough to go to Rupp, tough to go against a ranked Kentucky team, tough to go against a John Calipari team who does tend to get a lot of things to fall their way. Just tough in general to play against Kentucky. But this is a year in which Kentucky, looks incredibly vulnerable. And if Mississippi State is able to go back to the form that they've been in non-conference play, and then especially against Vanderbilt, then this should honestly be a Mississippi State victory, simply because there's really no one on the Kentucky roster who, honestly, is better than Q Weatherspoon or Lamar Peters. It's just a question of what Kentucky team shows up. Because Kentucky did beat Auburn, yes. Kentucky did beat a North Carolina squad earlier in the year, but that, on like a neutral court, thing. But as of late, Kentucky has not looked like themselves. They have really looked the same way that Mississippi State opened up conference play, just inconsistent, not looking like the team they were, shaping up to be. So this could be a matchup of 2 similar teams, quite honestly. It'll be very interesting to see what happens. But the fact of the matter is, this is a winnable game for the Bulldogs. And this is a game that they should, after 2 conference wins, they should feel confident in their ability to push the Wildcats and maybe even walk out of Rupp with a victory. We'll see what happens after Tuesday. We'll evaluate that a little bit more. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of positives. There's a lot of good stuff to come out of that Vanderbilt game, especially considering it was a, dominant win on a terrible shooting night. The keys to victory against Kentucky, therefore, boil down to just a few things. Q needs to be creative. Eric needs to show out in his home state, right? He needs to play. He doesn't need to be timid. He was timid against Ole Miss, timid against South Carolina, timid against Florida. Don't be timid. Eric cannot be timid. And if the Bulldogs can rattle the freshmen on the Wildcats, because they have looked rattleable, that's a word I'm just going to come up with here. They've looked like they could be rattled. And if the Bulldogs can shoot just a little bit better, if the Bulldogs could just shoot just a hair better than they did against Vanderbilt, that's huge. The fact of the matter is, the keys to the game are going to be things that have been starting to come together against Florida and Vanderbilt. So honestly, if the Dogs just continue to do what they have been doing the past couple of games, hey, that could prove to be very, very good against the Wildcats on Tuesday. We'll find out how it goes, obviously, once Tuesday rolls around, and we'll have more to talk about after that. So that's going to wrap up this episode of the Weekly Pessimist. Quick recap of the past week. A good week in basketball for the Dogs. I'm your friend Joseph Craven. Radar O'Reilly has jumped in my lap and is trying to push me out of the chair I'm sitting in. So I'm going to play with her a little bit because she is hyper AF. I'll see you next time on the Weekly Pessimist.